welcome to Manassas and welcome to my home.
Thank you. Thank you for having me out here.
Yeah.
This is the second time you've invited me somewhere, the first time on your show.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know if I ever told you this, but your show appearance rolled into me getting my first speaking engagement.
I can imagine that. The speaking engagement was out in Wisconsin.
Yep, Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah, because it was my friend in North Carolina, Carlton Huffman.
Yep, who's now my friend.
Yes. Yeah. So Carlton, I met him when I was interning in college on the Tom Tillis for Senate campaign in North Carolina. Carlton was really active in North Carolina politics, and he was watching my show when it was on YouTube and saw our conversation, and he reached out, Facebook message, I don't know, a couple weeks later, and wanted to get you out to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Super, super cool. I just love when that kind of thing happens.
It was, because, actually, where's Fork?
Right down there. Yeah.
It's interesting because when I first started doing all this, I never saw myself as giving like speeches in public or anything like that. And I'm kind of an introverted person who's being forced to do extrovert things, is the way I describe it. But doing that was kind of like very different. Going on a show and speaking is different. Doing a podcast is different. So all these new experiences were things that I didn't really expect to have happen. But especially having like my first speaking engagement was right before James Lindsay and speaking in front of 600 people. That was not something that I had in the cards. So
how'd you do on your first time?
It's interesting because I think in psychology, they tell you to acknowledge how you feel. So I was nervous. I wasn't too nervous, but I was nervous. And when I went on stage, I acknowledged it to the crowd. I said, "Excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous." And they were like, "Ooh, it's all right." And I got it out there and I was good. After a few minutes, I didn't even think. I just said what came to mind. I had like a little bit, I usually do like speeches in points.
Yeah.
I followed my points and then I hit him with my last statement and got a standing ovation. And I remember James, I'll never forget, James asked me like 2 or 3 times, he was like, "This was your first time speaking?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, you got a standing ovation the first time you spoke. That's awesome."
That's because people are rooting for you. In most rooms that you're in, people are rooting for you. And when you don't want to like set yourself up for failure or set expectations low, but it can really build solidarity between the speaker and the audience when you're willing to just briefly share, like, I'm a little bit nervous, right? There's a difference between doing that and I think what people do in acting and in theater, when you're an amateur and you mess up a line and you go, "Oh, I'm sorry, got that wrong. Let me start over. Let me go back."
Yeah.
Where you sort of reveal to the audience that you messed up. You don't do that in public speaking either. But what you can do is just introduce yourself, share a little bit of that, vulnerability, and get people on your side, and then they're rooting for you to succeed, and then you do almost all the time. You can succeed when you let people know that you're nervous.
Yeah.
I'm glad that worked out for you though, because I am still scared of public speaking. Done a lot of television. I've done public speaking on a number of occasions, and I just don't actually think I'm very good at it. I love teaching it. I love to teach it, but I actually don't think I'm very good at it.
I mean, listen, some of the best coaches were terrible players.
Right. I've never really assumed that Coach K, could outdo any of his players at Duke. What's the guy in Hercules, the little goat man, Philip Tedides? You remember that old Disney movie? He's like the Greek trainer of heroes in the Hercules Disney animated movie from the 90s.
You know what? I don't think I've ever seen it. I'm familiar with them, but I don't think I've watched it.
I have on 1 or 2 occasions likened myself to Philip Tedides because, he's the trainer of heroes. I love training public speakers. It's one of my favorite things to do. I've trained people for like Shark Tank type pitch competitions. I've trained people for speaking at conferences, and I love it because I feel like I can help spot people's weaknesses and their strengths very quickly, and then tell them, here's like 3 tried and true ways to succeed. But I mean, I wouldn't book me for a TED Talk, but I would love to work with somebody on their TED Talk. So trainer of heroes, but don't send me into battle. Please. Probably won't work out well.
So let me ask you this actually, because I never really thought about this. But do you think public speaking can be effective, and whatever your goal is? Like, do you think it's truly motivating? Or is it just kind of like, we heard the thing we want to hear and we feel better?
I mean, obviously the answer has to be yes, because I've experienced being motivated by a person on stage. I have experienced that skipping of a heartbeat or that acceleration of a heartbeat when a speaker is really just go.
Yeah.
And is getting people fired up. It's really rare. There are a lot of imitators and fakers out there who have studied speakers, and then they try to do all the best hits and all the things that people demonstrate on TED Talks, like pacing the stage and speaking to one side of the audience and then to the other. But I have experienced seeing great speakers, and I have felt inspired, and I wanted to get off my butt and do better. So it has to exist, right?
I think so. And I know what you mean. Like, I'm by no means a public speaking expert, but it's kind of like acting. You could be someone who's not good at acting, but you can recognize bad acting, and you can recognize like someone who's a bad speaker. It's kind of like, actually, another thing about it, it's kind of like overacting. They're now they're over speaking. Guys, don't you feel like they talk like that?
Yeah.
And it's a very unnatural way of delivering a message to someone. It seems overdone, and you can predict what the next thing that they're about to say and how they're going to say it.
It's painful to watch. I was just watching somebody give a talk to a very influential national association. I guess I won't name names, on a live stream the other day. They were speaking to a crowded room and to people online. And, they gave a teleprompter speech where this person's walking the stage, speaking to the association members, and you can see at the bottom of the stage there are 3 screens, and each one has teleprompter copy. Teleprompter copy should be a guide, not the actual script.
Right.
Because then people start performing the teleprompter copy in this just weird, canned way. And even great TV presenters, of which I am not, but I have done it. You write your teleprompter copy, you write your script, and then you embellish and kind of fill in gaps. You can even like work in pauses and uhs and ums artificially, just to be a little bit more real, to be more yourself. I just find when people are trying to follow the script, it ends up being really bad. You have to use it as the guide to get you where you're going, and then just have fun, fill in gaps. You get to one part in your copy, and then you just get an idea, like you remember, oh, like this thing in the copy reminds me of a story about my dad. Tell the story.
Yeah.
Just like go completely off, tell the story, and then come back to the next thing on the teleprompter copy. And the same thing goes for giving speeches.
So what you're saying is I've been doing it right.
Yes, you're always doing it right.
Thank you. No, because you hear people like, did you write your speech? You hear stuff like that, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I want to write a speech. Like, I think I have an idea of what I want to talk about, and so I just have bullet points. But like you said, there have been times that, like, I'll make it 3/4 of the way down, but I never address the last part, because the one part that I'm on, I really want to expand on, and then I just go straight to the end.
Yeah, you're vibing.
Yeah, it's a vibe.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, you just hit your stride and just keep hitting that point and wrap it up. Stay on time. Don't bore people. and say something that you actually mean. Because just because you wrote a speech doesn't mean you mean anything that you said.
Yeah.
And I think people can tell. They can tell.
Speaking of which, I'm trying to think if I should name which conference this was. Let's just say that it was a conservative conference that I went to.
Okay.
And I happened to be a vendor there, and I'm listening to all these big name commentators, presenters, and stuff like that give speeches and stuff. And I was there for a number of days. I'm trying not to reveal which conference it was. I was there for a number of days, and I listened to every single person that got up. And there were a few that I think did like a good job. Not to say that the others were bad, but there was just nothing there, right? I don't remember what they were talking about. Like it's completely forgettable. And it's because it felt like much like a pep rally. The left is bad, women are women, men are men. Like there is no, it was that type of stuff. And I realized like a lot of people said stuff, but they didn't say anything, right? It was just a bunch of words. And a matter of fact, when you listen to that many people, like there is a huge obvious overlap where they make the same Sam Britton jokes, like just the same type of commentary, the same type of stuff over and over and over, and no one's actually saying anything different. So like, first, I know most people at a conference aren't listening to every single speaker, but even if you listen to half of them, what are you actually getting out of it? And that was like the disappointing thing, listening to on the political right, was that there isn't much substance given. And I felt bad as a vendor. I felt bad because I'm talking to the people who paid money to go there. They paid hundreds of dollars to go there. And not everybody's wealthy, but they wanted to see their favorite conservative commentators and stuff like that. And here I am talking to them, and I'm like, and this is what they're getting. And to me, I think that's a shame that they didn't get any sort of inspiration. Go out and make babies was the biggest plan of action that they.
I like that message.
It was like, okay.
Rally the troops. I just got back from church before making this food, and there's a point in a good Protestant sermon where the band finishes playing, and then one of the assistant pastors or lead pastor comes up on the stage. It's like every week. I've seen this at every church I've ever gone to, and they reference the lyrics of the song that was just played. He's like, God is good. God is great. His power is mighty. Just, reading back the lyrics, and people are cheering and responding to that. But that's the hype man part of the service. That is putting forward the message, affirming that we're all on the same page here, that we're all here for the same reason. And then after that, maybe one more song, comes the actual sermon. And there was this is a sidebar, I guess, a changing of topic, but there was a controversy in my favorite world recently of Star Wars, where the Disney was being criticized pretty rightly for hiring this woman named Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, a documentarian, who's going to be directing one of the next Star Wars movies. And she... fans dug up a video of her speaking in 2015 about her enjoyment of making men uncomfortable with her movies and her projects. Making men uncomfortable. I love it. I enjoy it. Now, in context, she was talking about movies focused on violence against women in Pakistan. That's what she was talking about in that clip. But it immediately started a conversation among Star Wars fans about, what is a good way to approach any movie, a Star Wars movie? Do you come forward with a message that you're going to evangelize people with? Or are you focusing on telling an interesting story?
Right.
And kind of what you're talking about with public speaking and going to conferences is that it's all rallying the troops. It's all preaching evangelism, and just getting people to cheer, because it's very easy to get people to cheer, to clap their tongues and applaud, and that's just not very interesting. But a really compelling message and a really compelling story tends to start with the storyteller revealing something about themselves that they struggle with, that they are weak in, that they don't like, looking inward a little bit, just a little bit of self-reflection.
Yeah.
And this comes from one of C.S. Lewis's essays on, it's called 3 Ways of Writing for Children. I recently did a course with Hillsdale College looking at children's literature, and they have you read this essay as part of it. C.S. Lewis is the Brit who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And in this thing, he talks about how to entertain and enlighten children through your literature, and whether or not a writer, a storyteller, should start with the moral or if they should start with the story. And it tends to be in our culture that we validate and give applause to people who just come at you with the moral. They just come at you with, here's the thing that you need. I'm going to preach to you. And it happens in the speeches at political conferences. It's in our movies. It's everywhere. Just evangelism. I like, evangelism in the Christian sense, but like, you actually need to reach people with a story that compels them to listen. And it's not going to come from you saying, A, B, and C that they'll applaud for. You need to share some struggle that you've had. I think that's the better way to start a story. Sorry, that was a tangent.
No. And actually, you made me think about it, because I think a lot of people who don't do public speaking, they think that the high point of the speech is when people applaud. Because like you said, that's actually the easier part, especially if they're by default on your side, right? So they're going to cheer for you. I've listened to lazy applauses, like, sure, I think this is where we applaud. But it's actually the silence, because they're paying attention to what you're saying. And the head nods, or the, it's things like that. And that speech, it was different because I was telling a personal story. I was telling my story, and it connected with people, and they understood where I was coming from. And they're listening, and they're imagining what I'm telling them. So, like, to me, like you said, is it the story or the moral? To me, it was telling the story so you understand the moral aspect of it, why this is right or why this is wrong. And I hate I hate how movies are turning into like characters who have no flaws.
Yeah.
Like, and it tends to be especially the women empowering ones, where she's not just smart, she's the smartest. She's not just beautiful, but she's the most beautiful. Like, she's like the unicorn. And if it's a group of them, they're all like that. And she's just like friends with unicorn women who have, 200 IQ, scientist, model.
Never afraid, never intimidated.
And she can beat up men 3 times her size.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, what can't you do?
Right, exactly.
And there are genres where, of course, this is always the case with your heroes. But again, I just kind of going back to this director, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. The backstory again is that she's this documentarian she's Pakistani Canadian, and she focuses on violence against women in Islamic countries, which is a very important topic to make documentaries on and tell that story. So she's coming from that world, but in this quote that she gave, she was talking about, I love making men uncomfortable, and the stories I tell, I want people, particularly men, to look in the mirror and see where they are wrong, and see in my story, how they need to do better and improve. And I hope when they go home, they will change their ways. And I was listening to this comment, I was like, persuasion does not work like this. you don't like tell this moral story from on high, and then your intended audience, bad men, they watch it and they go, oh, I'm going to change my ways. Thank you so much for showing that to me.
Yeah.
A much more interesting way to reach people's hearts and to change their minds is to show relatability between their flaws and the flaws and struggles of others to build common cause and common understanding. Empathy. That requires being able to see yourself in another person. And so, like, if you were going to tell a story based on this director's experiences, where her life's work has been dedicated to women being victimized and mangled by religious extremists in the Middle East, kind of a natural fear of men. Then what if you told a story where you flipped the script and you had a female lead character who's got a natural bitterness about men, but every man in the movie is actually being really kind, gentle, loving, and friendly to her, but she just can't see it because she's had a bad experience. And so you are changing and subverting audience expectations in that way, where the character was wronged, but she actually has a flaw, which is now she cannot see kindness in men when it is right in front of her.
Right.
The guy who held the door open for you is not a misogynist. He's a good man trying to open the door for you because your hands are full. And your experiences are actually making you bitter and suspicious. That's a better place to start because you're looking inward. And what C.S. Lewis said in that essay was, if you begin with what moral does my audience need, you're going to tell a horrible story.
Yeah.
Instead, you begin with what moral do I need? And so you have to remind yourself, I've seen horrible things in this world, but I need to remember grace. I need to remember goodwill. Because if you've just learned that everyone is awful and all men or all women are awful, and then tell that story, it's going to be very unenjoyable for all kinds of audiences.
Yeah, I think when you tell a story, like you said, persuasion, and you're saying you want to understand your audience and how to persuade them, but the problem is that, not necessarily talking about this person, but maybe this director, but the feeling I get is that these people feel that they are better than their audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you feel that you are morally superior, better than, you have no interest in meeting where people are, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just, they say that they want people to change their ways, but they just want to show that they're better than the people that are consuming their product, listening to their, or watching their movies. And I think that's like the elitism aspect of it, where they presume that the audience is bad, or they presume that the audience is ignorant and stupid. And so we need to teach these people to do better.
Do better.
Right. It's very presumptuous, right? And I think that's the type of thing that has been kind of poisoning movies for the past, especially since 2020. All the movies that have been coming out is absolutely terrible. And it's not to say there could be movies with bad men, mm-hmm. right? But it's how you're telling the story. Or we've always had movies that had women who were strong female leads. That's not an issue, especially with a lot of guys. There are a lot of movies. One of my favorite movies, I think, is an underrated movie, is Salt, with Angelina Jolie.
Oh, right, of course.
She's strong female lead. She's kicking ass. I love that movie.
Mm-hmm.
This was before, and they're not trying to say all men are bad in that movie. I never got that impression. I always saw her as this badass figure who's just trying to do everything she possibly can to do what she's doing, and she's kicking these dudes' ass. But I never felt like Angelina Jolie is trying to give me some deeper message. It's no, it's an action movie.
Yeah. Just
like if I'm watching Bruce Willis in Die Hard with Vengeance, it's an action movie. There's not really much of a deeper story or a deeper message that needs to be given. It's like, I like that stuff. Not everything needs to have some deeper meaning to it. Like, we want to be entertained. And I think the entertainment aspect is like being pushed to the side to give some moral moral story, and even something kind of benign.
Yeah. If you're telling a good story, the moral will present itself. It's the audience will find the moral in it. But if you start with the moral and then try to graft a story around it like scaffolding, it's just going to come across like a sermon. I was thinking about a little bit about a talk that I'm actually writing right now, because I'm giving a speech in Washington first weekend of February. I'm going to LibertyCon. It's associated with Students for Liberty, and I'm giving a 15-20-minute talk. I'm very nervous about it, but I am giving it on my area of passion, which is the political allegory of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And I've gone to this conference for years. It is a pep rally in some ways. It's sort of a libertarian pep rally for students. And I love it, but there's often a lot of it that comes across like a sermon. And even as a Christian, I've always been the guy in the audience who kind of crosses my arms, because I just sort of am very reluctant to be preached to. I have to really work at it and open myself up to that. And so I'm going to give a talk where I'm going to reveal a lot of my uncertainty about our ideas, our libertarian ideas of letting go of power, of not building government Death Stars, of not throwing the ring of power into the fires of Mordor, but instead actually using that ring for good. Because Republicans and Democrats, they, again, I don't know if you're a Lord of the Rings person, but the whole idea is that if you can get control of the government, you can do good things with it.
Right.
Democrats have always believed this, at least going back to the progressive era. And Republicans, as of late, particularly the new right, has adopted this mindset, which is, what's with this idea of smothering the government, making government so small you can smother it in the bathtub? We should be using government for conservative purposes and putting good policy into action using the government. No more of this Reagan small government stuff. And I'm very attracted to that. I'm very attracted to doing good with power. And it cuts right against a lot of my libertarian principles and my view of the way that the world should be. So I tell people when they ask, like, what are you politically? I'm a libertarian by choice, and I'm a conservative by nature. I was born conservative. I've always been conservative, and I have a lot of conservative tendencies. But I believe in libertarian principles, and I believe that they are right. But it's very hard for me to adopt them and put them into practice, because I would very much like to vote for the right of center candidate who will punish our enemies, and do good things with power. But I just happen to believe, because of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, my faith, human beings can't handle that. They can't handle that power. They always misuse it. They always get corrupted by it. And you have to throw the ring into the fires and destroy it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about at LibertyCon. And again, that's going to come from my position of sharing my doubts with the audience. And I hope there will be people in the room who will feel the same way. And I have to believe that I'm not the only person in that room who believes in libertarian values, but just goes, but we're always losing. We're always losing. I want to win.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to talk to those people. I don't do pep rallies.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That I like how you said we're always losing. I mean, this is kind of true. I'm very much so mixed, political philosophy wise. There are certain things I'm pretty liberal on, and there are things that I have more of a conservative tendency towards. So like family, for example, abortion, being pro-life. These particular things I am more conservative minded on, but I just try to, I kind of feel like there's a common sense answer to a lot of political things. And like even my book, when I wrote my book talking about race, to me, much of the things I'm talking about are just kind of common sense things that a lot of people feel. And it's not a Black conservative viewpoint. And I never really liked that framing for myself. Some people like it, that's their prerogative. But I never wanted to be seen as the Black conservative, if you can't help what people call you.
Yeah. The gay conservative, the Black conservative. Yeah, it's just like it's a genre of commentary.
Yeah. And that's why like my Twitter bio doesn't say anything. I always kind of leave it up to the audience.
We're the president of anti-Blackistan.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Or anti. So it's ain't Blackistan.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Two different things.
Mr. President.
But as far as the libertarian part, I'm like, we saw each other at Freedom Fest last year, and I'll be there this year. I like libertarians. I like most of what libertarians want, but I think there's like a gaping hole in some of the outcomes that they want, and that gaping hole is human nature.
Yep.
And so while like I hear when someone says we should have no police force and by the government, and we should have private police forces, and if you don't like what they do, you can just not pay them and get another police force. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not how things work. Like, what if at first there's 20 police forces around America, and then they just start buying each other? Now we have an East Coast and West Coast police force. Mm-hmm. Then what? Right? There's no account for monopolies.
Yeah.
We have monopolies now. Now imagine if there's no government to establish that a monopoly can even exist or not exist. So I think personally that personal libertarian values are good. Like do no harm, allow people, I would say allow people to live their life how they want. I personally don't care if gay people get married. Doesn't affect me whatsoever. If that's what you want to do, I don't necessarily have to agree with everything that somebody else does, but just keep it to yourself.
Yeah, I think the thing that for the clash between libertarians and the new right, the area where I've been persuaded by these more common good conservatives who are challenging a lot of the libertarian orthodoxy in the Republican Party that's really been there for several decades since the Cold War, is just the idea that government can be neutral and that power is neutral in some kind of sense. Mm-hmm. Because like libertarians have sort of railed against the way that Ron DeSantis has been governing schools down in Florida, saying that there are certain things that are not welcome on school library shelves, getting involved in curriculum and having the government play an active role in the things that are going to be taught. Of course you should do this, because if you don't play a role in crafting the way that things are going to be, the flow of information, what's taught in history classes, what books are on shelves, then someone else is going to decide.
Right.
There will always be somebody's value system in place. And the libertarian movement is just not comfortable taking a position on that government should actually assert, hey, this is what we're going to do in our public schools. Because I think we're very used to the left running the show. Mm. The Department of Education is an inherently progressive institution. It's very understandable to say, if Ron DeSantis sets the history curriculum in Florida today, and we have a Democrat, a progressive Democrat who's governor of Florida in 10 years, they're going to do the same thing. Yeah, I get that. That's probably what's going to happen. But then whose right is it? Like, someone has to actually set the codes within schools
Right.
for what kind of information is going to be there. There is no neutrality. Somebody's values are going to win. And I just think that we should probably try to pick a set of values that we advocate for and try to have them entrenched in places like schools and government. I think that we should not funnel public dollars to universities that are illiberal.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we should funnel any public dollars to schools that are actively promoting anti-Americanism and training their students to hate the country.
Right.
Who wins? Like, who wins in that situation? Certainly not us. There has to be some kind of thing that is good for the nation.
Absolutely.
And it exhausts me that libertarians are not willing to engage on that.
But, and also the other part, like if someone used Ron DeSantis as an example, they speak about it like it's in a vacuum. Ron DeSantis is responding to what has been done for years. So someone has used their power to influence education, and he's one of the, I don't want to say the first person, but he's the most out in the open governor who's saying, no, screw this. I'm trying not to curse, but screw this shit. But screw it. I'm taking it, and I'm going to try to put it back to what it was. And I've gotten to know some of the people part of DeSantis' team in his campaign. I never really got the feeling that some people are afraid like this is going to turn into like overtly conservative PragerU, type of curriculum that they're putting in public schools. I'm not an educational expert, but from what I can tell, it very much so feels like he's trying to put it back to what it was, right? Which was somewhat liberal, right? Right now it's progressive, it's far left. Now he's trying to put it back to somewhat liberal, trying to get back to the basics of math, science, can kids read, these things that used to be important, the literacy rates for children, and less so about how are you feeling right now? What gender are you? Let's talk about sexuality. These things, I don't think our public institutions need to be hyper-focused on for very small children. And I think that is what he's ultimately trying to do. And I think sometimes people talk about it like one day Ron DeSantis woke up and just said, you know what, let's have a conservative education system. When really he's responding, like political figures respond to political pressure. So there's a political movement that's happening post-COVID. Parents are seeing what's being brought home for the first time because they weren't paying attention before. And so now they're saying like, hold on a second. I didn't know they were teaching this in school. They just presumed it was like when they were growing up. Like, when we were growing up, it was somewhat sort of liberal, sort of neutral-ish.
It aggravates me to no end when I turn on the television and see commentators talking about race and how it's taught in schools and our racial history and how it's taught in schools. And they're like, kids aren't learning that slavery happened or that slavery was a bad thing. And people aren't being taught about Martin Luther King. So what world are you living in?
We all learned that.
I've only I spent 2 years in a Christian private. I remember learning about it there. And then the rest of my life was spent in public schools. And I feel like every other lesson came back somehow to America's troubled past.
Right.
And I wasn't like in a radically liberal area. It's just the status quo. What world are these Gen X and Boomer commentators who are on television living in where we didn't learn about these things and know about them?
Yeah.
Maybe they grew up in a time period where they weren't taught in the classroom, but I'm a millennial. We certainly have. This is not a real problem. And like even with the schools thing, because I was talking about throwing the ring back into the fire, the Lord of the Rings analogy. You want to use the power for good, but you should probably destroy it. And so there are really great advocates. Corey DeAngelis is one of them. School choice advocate. Vouchers for students. Money should follow the students and be tied to them, not to schools. I love it. Give people choice so that they can take their kids to the school of their choice or homeschool them whatever. More options in education, but public schools will still exist.
Yeah.
So what's going to be taught? Is it everybody has the right to pull their kids out of the schools and homeschool them or send them to a private, but then everybody who has to send their kids or chooses to send their kids to public schools are going to become far left government drones? And that's just going to be the status quo? Because it will be.
Yeah.
It will be the status quo. Everyone who goes to that system will be learning a different set of values. So why not fight for some kind of better set of values, or a status quo that maybe you and I recognize from the 1990s?
Right.
It's a choice that actually has to be made. And you got to fight for what's in those curriculums. You got to fight for what's being taught and what is not allowed. It bugs me when Ron DeSantis makes it impossible or bans the having of like genderqueer on library school shelves. And the left and libertarians come out to say, that's censorship. And you go like, you wouldn't have a biography of Ron Jeremy, a porn star, on the school shelves.
Right.
And I'm not equating the biography of a porn star to genderqueer necessarily. But what I'm saying is, in a school, not all books are welcome.
Right.
You have limited space. And so you have to pick, you have to curate, you have to say, these things don't come here, these things do. And so immediately you're admitting that there is already a system where you have to choose.
Right.
Same thing with teaching and teaching history. In teaching history, you can teach people about Martin Luther King, and you can teach them about Malcolm X. Two different perspectives, alive and active at the same time during the civil rights movement, with very different visions of race in America. Can whites and blacks get along? Can you have a post-racial society? Two very different men. You can talk about both of them, but which one are you going to prioritize? Which one are you going to spend more time on? Which figure are you going to have painted on one of the walls in the hallway, right? Not all people are going to be on the wall in the mural hallway within the school. Right. You actually have to say no to some people. And so you've got to choose. And that's a value judgment. And we shouldn't be afraid to admit that value judgments happen every single day.
Yeah.
I, for one, we were like the Martin Luther King generation. Like that was like all we learned about. I don't remember learning too much about Malcolm X or his views. I learned those in college. And I think that's actually the right time to learn those and learn some of that nuance about the civil rights movement. You got to pick where you begin. Right. And I think the right place to begin for kids is the post-racial, we can all be friends and neighbors vision of race of Martin Luther King. And then you get more complicated when it goes to college. Because that's life, right?
Yeah.
Like you do the tough stuff in higher education. It seems to me that you have a generation of elementary and middle school teachers who are failed academics who wanted to be professors, but they didn't have what it takes. So they teach second grade English and they teach second grade history, and they want their kids in that classroom to be learning about the stuff that they would have loved to have taught at the university. And it's corrupting and confusing our children. Period.
Yeah. No, I shit. I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I think there's, I don't even know how to come back to that.
the failed university scholars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I was adjunct for 2 years. Like, oh, man.
And now I'm teaching history in third grade and have to make a decision about MLK or Malcolm X.
Actually, that's what I wanted to say. One of the things that always annoys me was like, they didn't teach this in school. It's like, they can't teach you everything in grade school. Like, hello, you have the internet. You have a supercomputer in your pocket. Like, learn some shit on your own.
Yeah.
Like, not everybody needs to teach you. But I think people try to act like the absence of teaching you something is actually trying to hide it from you. It's like, no, like there's only so much time in a day. You're only in school for so long.
That's right.
There's only so much expertise. Like, that's what it is.
We act like that everything has to happen in elementary, middle, and high school when kids are in there for 6 hours a day. Strong air quotes on that, because it's a lot of mingling, free time, recess, disciplinary action, and then a little bit of instruction.
Right.
But you should be going into the weeds of subjects, the stuff they didn't want to tell you in elementary school when you go to college.
Right.
That's what that is for.
But I think there's this motivation to try to say that they're holding something from you. And I usually see it from like conspiratorial kind of people, even leftists. Leftists are very conspiratorial, non-believing that we actually did learn about slavery. They're like, no, you didn't. No, you learned the watered down version of slavery. Like, all right, whatever.
Which version did you want me to learn? Like, it's watered down. What do you even mean by that?
Exactly. I don't know. I think if you don't want power, someone else will. So it's a matter of the person that actually wants the power, do they have good intentions? Because if you just stand back and just let them have it, then what is our world going to turn into? And that's, in my opinion, that's what DC has turned into. The people who want the power and only do things to hold that power, and after a period of time, it corrupts you, and then you just start doing all types of stuff. And where does that leave us, the people who are being governed, when the guy who wants the power only takes meetings from lobbyists, only reacts to certain things when pressure is there, when he needs to, doesn't seem to have any moral principles that guides his governance, or even cares that much as to what his constituents think, his or her constituents think. And I don't know, it just seems like a type of person that really wants it. Like, people have come to me like, why don't you run for office? I say, I don't want the power. And I actually, even more so, even if I was okay with having power, I know what the game is. The biggest problem with the political game is that you have to kiss ass to make money. And you have to make connections with people to get money so you can run for elections. And then depending on the seat, you're running for office every 2 years. So it's like in a perpetual need for money.
Yeah, I've thought about running for office because I have a view of it that somebody has to do it. And I'm really tired of morons in my district doing it. And I would like to offer people my vision, my view of the good. I would like to do that. I don't know when the time is to do that. I guess that's what prayer's for. But I remember one of my bosses, my first internship in Raleigh, North Carolina, I was working for the former GOP chairman for the state of North Carolina. And he told me, when he asked me, you ever want to run for office, Stephen? I was like, yeah, I'm a political science student. Of course I do. And he was like, just make sure you make your money first. Like, and this is mixed, right? I have two minds about this. He goes, make sure you make your money first. Have a good career, bank money, and be independently okay. Because the people who are not independently well off and have not made their money and had careers, they get into trouble. They take money where they shouldn't take money because they need it. Right. Because they need the money. It's hard to hold down a job unless you're an entrepreneur and work for yourself when you're trying to manage the state legislature or Congress. And there's sometimes conflicts of interest. Right now, I've thought on and off about running for office, but I also work for a political nonprofit that does issue advocacy. I don't think I could have my job. Right. So I'd be unemployed. So I have no idea how I would do that. So there's two things going on there. One, you can stay out of trouble better if you had a fruitful career and are independently wealthy. But is that the world that we want, where you have to be independently wealthy to run for office?
And that's what we see.
It should be the people's house. It should be populated by everyday people. And so there has to be a balance somewhere. But right now it's just like people who already do have money and they still want more. And they're still corrupt. You just get the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work that's involved as well, even if you do have the money. But it costs a lot of money to run ads. It costs a lot of money to have a staff.
Let me tell you something that I've been convinced of. I'm not an expert on this issue area, but I do think it's really interesting. So I have a friend here in this area named Jeff Mayhew. I think you might meet him at Freedom Fest here this year, but he has convinced me of the policy proposal of uncapping the House, which is to expand the size of the House of Representatives. And the idea of this policy is pretty simple. The constitutional order for the House of Representatives was for it to grow with the size of the American population. And the size of the House of Representatives has not grown proportionate to population since like 1914, right? And so this was the way that it was up until the progressive era, and then they capped representation, and it hasn't changed. And I don't think we need to say how large our population is now in proportion to the early 20th century. It is not the same country, and yet the number of seats available to the people in the House is the same. And so when you think about the fundraising burden, the campaigning burden of anyone who wants to run for office, I mean, if you're here in Northern Virginia, again, I'm not great at demographics right off the cuff, but you are talking about, in my district alone, having to campaign for like 1 million people. It's huge. That's not workable. That is not realistic. Your districts and your representatives should know almost everybody influential in their area. They should be regular guests at the coffee shops and the restaurants in my area, just surrounding me right here. But right now they have to campaign in 6 different counties. It's crazy. It shouldn't be that way. And conservatives bristle when you talk about growing Washington.
Yeah.
When you talk about having more of these corrupt bureaucrats and politicians going to the swamp for all of this stuff. But I think it's correct that we actually don't have enough representation, and the people who do represent us are stretched thin. They don't know who I am, and why should they? Because there's way more people in the district that I live in Northern Virginia than there used to be.
Yeah.
So how do you expect them to even succeed?
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was talking to a lobbyist actually, and you know, he was actually very good as far as like breaking things down in an easy way to kind of understand. Because I think a lot of people think how DC works, or think how politicians work, or what their mindset is. But then when you talk to people who are actually involved, you realize that like there's a lot more to it than that. So one of the things he was telling me a bunch of different scenarios where, as a lobbyist, he's trying to get their attention, and all the different things that he has to do, and the things that he's learned over a period of time of being a lobbyist. But at the end of the day, what it came down to is bandwidth. They just don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah, they don't.
And they get so many people, because like probably for the reason you're saying, the district is so huge. And so everybody who has some sort of interest brings it to them. So that's what the staff members are trying to gatekeep a little bit, because it just gets so much. And then the phone calls from constituents, there's so much that's happening, and their bandwidth is overloaded. On top of there needs to be a political will to do whatever the thing that the lobbyist is asking for. So it's not just, we'll give you money, do this. Okay, I'll just do this random thing that no one's asking for.
Yeah.
And the person I was talking to is a school choice advocate, and he had a particular proposal. Pre-COVID, hard to get a move.
Yep.
Post-COVID, now there's constituents who are talking about this. Every time they go back home, they're like, listen, we need to do something about these public schools. Before, no one was talking about the schools. Now they are. And so now that there's political will, now there's more of a chance for this person to have, moving forward, to pass this through. So there's all these different things. And I think sometimes people oversimplify, how politicians think, what they're motivated by, even down to completely not knowing what the political party, the party itself, what their job is. Like, I think a lot of people think that the RNC is designed to, the RNC has $1 trillion and they're just these money makers who just throw money at everything and they could just magically grow things. And that's not what they do.
Well, their job is to win elections for Republicans.
Right.
And what you have with all these purity tests, when things get ideological and, for Democrats, they can only support progressive candidates and in areas that should be more centrist. The RNC and the job of the political party is to be a vessel for certain ideas and people who want to join your party.
Right.
And in Northern Virginia, that means that you're going to have kind of squishy Republicans who can appeal to a lot of potential Democrats and swing voters. And that is not the business of a more conservative district in West Virginia or Kentucky. Right. And they hear about the RNC is supporting this rhino kind of liberal Republican in Northern Virginia. Yeah, our job is to beat the Democrats.
Right.
And in that area, that's what you're going to have to do. But people just think it's all about ideology and that, the Republican Party has to be some sort of bastion of conservatism. No, it's a bastion for Republicans.
Right.
And that definition is always going to change. And you don't run the MAGA candidate in the Manassas, Virginia area, which is what we did in one of our last cycles, because he is the most conservative and he will back Donald Trump. Well, that's going to lose here. It's just a total insanity. And that was why someone like Glenn Youngkin was able to win the governor's race in Virginia, because he actually activated the sensibilities of liberal, squishy soccer moms in Northern Virginia who are generally, they have sort of conservative home family values, but they like to be, pro-inclusion and diversity, and they're kind of liberal and a lot of their other mindsets, but they don't want some bodybuilder, former military Republican.
Right.
That's not the guy they're going to vote for. They're going to be kind of scared of that guy. They want the guy who combs his hair, is a little bit skinny, maybe drinks soy milk, but is also a family values guy who's not going to threaten their way of life, raise their taxes, or try to indoctrinate their children. Like Glenn Youngkin is that guy.
Right.
He's like Mitt Romney for Virginia. And you have to be okay with that for politics to work. You mentioned lobbyists. My dad is a lobbyist. He's been a lobbyist most of his career, and he taught me a lot about the way that whole business works. And it was what you were talking about, which is people being stretched thin. Lawmakers are not up to speed on issues, and they really value what lobbyists bring to their room, which is issue expertise. Yes, the lobbyists represent an industry, and they have a motive, which is to get you to align with their industry. But they also are just giving you information. They are telling you, this issue is coming up. Here are the facts about our industry, how taxes in this area would impact us, what the loss of jobs would be. Now do what you will.
Right.
You're giving them information, and that's the very optimistic point of view. And then there, of course, that you can argue about the different ways that it's corrupt, but I think it's a valuable thing to have lobbyists and people who go and educate lawmakers on a certain issue, because they are very stretched thin, which is why I actually think that there needs to be more of them. Again, the whole idea of expanding representation, very prickly, but I think it has to be done. We have too many people in this country, not enough representatives. So my wish list is government reform. I want term limits. I want a building project of another office building for legislators in Washington, D.C. And then I want increased salaries and I want more representatives. But for it not to be a lifestyle, a career for these people. So you can kind of see a couple of different ways that would work. More people go to Washington, there's more people there, there's more offices, but it's term limited. and you're not going to live there forever, and you're not going to make a career in Washington, D.C. You're going to go there, do your job, and then go get a life doing something else. So I think you can have better government, but conservatives are not really invested in better government arguments. And that's, I think, a problem. And maybe an area where the left outflanks us is actually thinking about how the system could work better.
Yeah, right now there's a ideological battle. From what I can tell, there's a struggle between the portion of the Republican Party that wants to give up Trump, because at the end of the day, are you winning elections? And is Trump a winning strategy, right? Is attaching your name as a Trump candidate a winning strategy anymore? And then there are the people who just want to say, like, listen, we dated the crazy promiscuous girl for a while, but we need to get back to like a stable relationship, and they want to get rid of the fast.
Is it Lauren Boebert? Is she the crazy one? The crazy promiscuous girl?
Well, actually, Trump is the crazy promiscuous girl. But yeah, there's a want to sort of, and a lot of people will hate this, because they think that the old Republican Party was completely out of touch. Part of it's true. But I think there's just this want to actually, in a funny way, be more common sense and maybe more liberal than where we are today. Because I think there's just this counter reaction. The left went hard left, abandoned people like me. And then the right says, you know what? Well, we'll outflank your hard left with hard right.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who are like in the middle, like, you know what? Maybe we complained a little bit too much about these old, sensible Republicans who just, said, to everything.
Make deals in back rooms. Right. I thought that's what this was all about. I thought the politics was about making deals in the back room and trading things that you valued for something else that you value.
Right.
So that laws could get passed and that budgets could get passed. But we've created an environment where the incentives are you have to win in every aspect of the debate and then crush your enemies. Politics doesn't work if it's only about crushing the Dems and crushing the Republicans when they're elected, right? Like, obviously elections is winner take all, but in government, yeah, it's about giving up stuff.
Right.
And yeah, I feel for people who are elected officials, because they hear from people, and a lot of people who are not even their constituents.
I know.
24/7. They're hearing from a national media. They're hearing from people on Twitter who they have no way of really telling if they're actually people in their district.
Or people.
Yeah, or people at all. And it's confusing. Who are you representing, and what are the incentives?
Yeah.
And the incentives right now are for government to not work. And I think we actually have to get engaged on a reform project to make it work again.
I agree. I think we have to find some sort of way to work together. And not, like I was talking to David Marcus. He's like, there was a point in time when Democrats and Republicans used to talk. Like
that was earmarks. Yes. It was the earmarks that had them talk.
Or even just like as people.
Yeah.
Right? Just in your general environment, you could go to dinner and your friend was a Democrat or Republican and vice versa, and you can just have a conversation.
Well, that reminds me about the housing, right? My building project. I want new offices for another big group of lawmakers who are getting added to the House, but also dormitory housing. Give them, and I'm completely serious. Townhouses, row houses, I don't care. But free housing for lawmakers. Because again, like I remember AOC was being roundly criticized when she got a second home in DC. What do you want her to do?
Yeah.
Not have a place here to live? I mean, she could obviously like rent maybe a cheaper apartment, but there should be a place on Capitol Hill where if you're an elected representative coming all the way across the country from Wisconsin, California, or even just up from New York on the Acela, that you live. And you live around other people who are there to do lawmaking and legislation. And so we're not talking like college dorm rooms here, but there should be a housing situation for people who win the seat in District 6 of wherever, and you have a place to live.
Yeah.
You go do your work, and then you go back home to your representatives. There's got to be a way to do it, and a way to incentivize these people to spend time around each other.
Okay. It makes even more sense now, because you're saying the idea is not for them to, you live here and there, and then only time you see each other is when like how they famously talk about in the lunchroom.
Yeah.
Like, there should be more interaction, and I think more interaction means that there might be a chance for good faith interactions, where it's like, all right, this guy, we don't see eye to eye on this policy, but I think he's a good guy, and that's just a start. And then maybe 1 out of 10 things that this person is really strong for, you agree with, well, then you can work together on that particular thing. It sounds crazy, honestly, Stephen. How do you think we're supposed to get along?
A lot of it sounds crazy, but I think people really want politicians to fail. I really do, because we hate politicians. They're corrupt, they're bad people, they're power hungry. I want politicians to have a system in which they can succeed at the job of representing me and my neighbors.
Right.
And again, so just like to hit those points, like more of them, more representatives, a housing situation where they don't need to engage in corruption or handouts or under the table agreements, to have a place where they can go into Washington, D.C. and live, a housing situation and a culture that puts them around other people who are doing lawmaking, term limits so that they're only going to be doing this for so long, even if they really, really love it. And you could also even bring back some of the things that people associate with corruption, which is earmarks to bills.
Right.
Like actually being able to do the process of give-outs and handaways, or handouts and giveaways in people's districts. It used to help politics work when lawmaker A could speak to lawmaker B and go, I will vote for your bill, but I would like a bridge repaired in my district. I don't see how the country was destroyed from us having that. Because it seems to me this country worked and accomplished some of the greatest things that it has ever accomplished in the era where lawmakers could do that.
Yeah. Meet
in back rooms, trade bridge deals, help fix each other's roads in each other's districts, and then maybe vote on a civil rights bill. You go back and you study the civil rights movement, it is just a parade of corruption for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to pass. Who cares? Who cares? Because the Civil Rights Act was passed.
Right.
So I don't care how many bridges were built in people's districts or roads were paved with people's names on them, because something good happened with that in the end. Now, obviously, bad things can happen. But we are setting these people up to fail, even down from allowing C-SPAN cameras in Congress. I do not think that transparency, quote unquote transparency, cameras in the building, cameras on the floor, has made this country better. I think it's made it worse. They're performing every time they go on the House floor to give a speech or to speak to their colleagues. They are being watched, and they should be afraid of that. They should be checking every single move they make, because if they are seen talking to a colleague that they're not supposed to be talking to, it will be used against them in their next primary race.
Right.
Like, please explain to me how C-SPAN has made this country better. It's helped turn politics into entertainment, and it has turned the art of lawmaking into the art of cutting ads and giving speeches that they can use for demagoguery and political ads. And I don't think that's their fault. I think that's the system that we have created.
Right.
We have said you can't make deals and everything you do will be on camera. And then we're surprised when it doesn't work.
That's a really good point. I never really thought about, because I've of course seen like C-SPAN where it's like they're putting on a performance. They got their staffer, changing the cards when they hit a certain point, and watching all that stuff. And I'm like, what is this for?
Who is this for?
Yeah. Right. Like, what is the point of this? Is anything coming out of this? Because it's almost like before they enter the room, you know how everybody feels about whatever this is.
Yeah.
So by making a public hearing, like, are we changing anything, or is it just adding to the show aspect, where we can just chop this up? The commentators get to say their part on both sides. The media gets to find that one clip, take it out of context, and blow it up and say, "See, I told you this person's crazy," or "Oh, they're fighting for the rights."
They're fighting, and that's the Trump phenomenon. In a nutshell, which is that Republicans were like, "I want a guy who fights, who punches back," and I get it. I respect the need for somebody to fight back against your enemies, but even like the art of just going on the floor and speaking to your colleagues is show fighting.
Right.
When they go out there and somebody gives a speech and they have their aide, right, with the cards and the pictures that they've printed out at FedEx Kinko's of like Hunter Biden doing cocaine, and they go, "Here's this image, colleagues. What do you think about this? Oh, and here's Hunter with the prostitutes. What do you think about this?" They're not doing it for their colleagues. They're doing it for their constituents.
Right.
And that is just for ads. That's just for getting reelected. They should be going on the floor and debating the issues. But they don't have to do that.
Yeah.
They don't have to do that. All they have to do is demonstrate, "I'm a fighter," because there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Take them away. I often will get criticized for being like pro-corruption of everything. It's like no cameras, earmarks, more backroom deals. But I just don't know why people are under the illusion that politics is clean.
Actually, yes. Yes. I've kind of come to that point too, where I'm like, yeah, they're corrupt, but like the system's corrupt. So like, no matter what you do, at some point, you're playing a game. Like, politics is a game, and there's a little bit of corruption that happens in it. And it's like, yeah, okay, you hook up a friend with a job. Like, all right, but like, that's not the biggest thing in the world, because this person is doing something good at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Is it good? And not necessarily, but it's kind of like, you kind of have to not think that becoming a politician means becoming a Boy Scout. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a dirty job. Because one of my good friends is a candidate, and she might be running again. The amount of torture, the amount of vitriol that comes to you once you decide to put a letter next to your name and run for office, death threats, people coming to your house, people slashing your tires. Like, there is a lot that people don't realize when it comes to just deciding to run for office. And like you said, not everybody is a billionaire who lives in Trump Tower and who has private security and not have to deal with your safety being harmed. But a lot of people do. And a lot of people take risk of losing business because now they're politically affiliated. And I don't want to be affiliated with someone who's of this party. Yep. There's so much risk when it comes to running for office. And that's why a lot of people run once, on top of having to beg for money so it's a lot. It's a lot that happens. And I think sometimes people just think that the RNC or the DNC will just sprout up some person to run in some district. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. There's a lot of risks at hand, and it's dirty. Like, it's just dirty. Yeah. Even people within your own party.
I think Trump understood that in a really constructive way, because one of the conservative, like establishment conservative criticisms of Trump was, the way that he talks about corruption, marital affairs, the way that he talks about his language. I mean, he's a scummy guy. He's like a New York, New Jersey casino and hotel owning. That's the kind of person that he is. And conservatives and evangelicals were under no illusions about that. They were, I think, impressed that Trump was being honest about the way that the system works and about who he is. And he was willing to say, this system works like this. I am also kind of a skeezy guy like the system, but I am going to use my powers for you. I'm going to use my powers and my experience working in slippery places for your benefit. And I think, by and large, he actually did that. He actually fulfilled that promise and used his slippery nature and his experience working in casinos and hotels for his voters, for his people. I think that there's something to that. And so I'm already afraid, like I've said on this broadcast, and I'm going to run for office one day at some point, and they're going to go, Stephen's like pro-corruption. It's like, I'm sorry that I live on...
Pro-corruption Stephen.
I'm sorry that I live on planet Earth, and politics has been like this since Greece. It's just, this is the way that it works. And you need somebody who is principled and honest and is going to go in there and make the best of the way that the system works. And if the system isn't working, it needs to be reformed.
Yes.
And we are overdue for reform.
This has been a great conversation. Before we end, I'd like to ask people, anyone I'm sitting in front of, are you optimistic about the future?
Oh boy. No, I'm not. One of my tendencies is that I am certainly of the like doomer prepper mindset, where you always have to be prepared for the day in which civilization no longer exists, and that the idea of the American experiment and Republican government doesn't exist anymore. I find it grating and egotistical to think that America, 200-something years old, is going to always be around or always exist in the way that it exists now, when literally no other civilization on Earth has ever been able to have a through line like the one that we imagine we're going to have. We've already had one civil war, and we've only been here for 200 years, and that happened in the first half. So, like, bad stuff is going to come. It's just a matter of when. And I will not be caught flat-footed by it. I'm not optimistic. I think there are rising forces of darkness across the world. I think you've got a triumvirate coming together in China, Russia, and Iran. I don't think that we are ready to fight. I don't think that we are ready for a challenge to American primacy around the globe. You see this right now with the Houthi pirates in the Red Sea, and how squeamish we have been about even doing a moderate airstrike on pirates, on inflatable boats in the ocean. So there's that, and then there's just our political culture is rapidly decaying, and our information structure in this country is geared towards conflict and geared towards getting us to hate and alienate ourselves from one another. And that does not have a happy ending. So doom and gloom, that is my name.
So
what about you?
I'm painfully optimistic about the future. I'm an optimist just in general. But I'm a realist when it comes to certain things. So while I recognize like everything you're saying is true, like I don't disagree with
Thank you,
what you're saying. But I see it as sometimes the best way to learn is from failure, right? And I think it's just a matter of how bad do we have to fail before we learn our lessons.
There's a Yoda line for that, as I'm sure you know. Failure, the greatest teacher is. Anyway, carry on.
But that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I'm also looking at regular people all the time who I like to say they were born from 2020, like myself, who said something is wrong. I need to do something, whether they became writers, commentators, politicians, whatever it might be, but almost kind of like how the Tea Party movement sprouted up all these people. Now, most of them pretty much disappeared, but it sprouted up a movement, and I think there's something good about that. It motivates people to try and get involved. And I think out of 2020, we saw, not to the same degree, but a similar type of movement, regular people saying something is wrong. We need to stand up. We need to go to our school board meetings. We need to push back as to what's happening around us. So those are the types of things that make me more optimistic about our future, even though those things that you're saying are true. That there's going to be a point where we hit a low. It's how we rebound from it, and if we rebound from it. So I think we will at some point. I hope and pray that like the superpowers of China and Iran and Russia coming together and really screwing us over doesn't happen anytime soon, because I think we're in a very weak state militarily. But if it does happen, how bad will it be? I have no idea. So, part of me is just a little bit of faith in that the American people will come out of their comfort zone and actually do something that's uncomfortable.
I think maybe we can agree on that, in that there will obviously be dark times that are going to come again. COVID, is an appetizer to, how dark things can get. But it did wake a lot of people up. We did have a lot of people who were born in March 2020. And there are going to be more people who are ready and willing and awake, who are going to be there for the dark times than there would have been before. Yeah. And that is something to be thankful and optimistic about. I agree. Yes.
But thank you so much for inviting me into your home. This actually, those biscuits were actually really fucking good.
Thank you. Just Pillsbury biscuits. I was telling your wife, Pillsbury biscuits in a circle pan. You shove them in there really tight, and in between each biscuit, put a butter chip. So butter chips in between all of them, onion powder, salt, pepper, and then you get the Pillsbury biscuits basically baking in butter, and it's crispier. And then you've got like powder on the top. It's just a lot better than doing it spread out on a pan.
That is food for thought. But thank you so much for inviting me to your home.
Yeah, it was so nice to have you. And good to see you again. I'm so excited about all the success you've been having.
Thank you. Yeah. And likewise for you as well. And I learned a little bit more. I didn't know you were doing all the things you were doing as far as teaching people how to speak publicly and all that.
Yes, sir.
So we have a lot to talk about behind the scenes. We'll take it from there. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam.